90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today, our special guest is Bill Belmont, and he's the head of the Belmont Group, investigators who help attorneys with litigation and also help the general public and business owners avoid litigation problems and to have an advantage when they are in litigation. Bill, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. For
our lawyers and listeners who may not be familiar, in general, how can someone like you, who's an attorney and also an investigator, how can you be of help to attorneys, especially in litigation?
Well, I like to look at us as almost the 911 for the legal profession. So a lot of times you get into situations that attorneys are involved in and you need help and you need assistance, but it's not something that rises to the level where law enforcement will get involved. That's what investigators do for you. So for litigators, a lot of times it's about either obtaining information on individuals or locating individuals. I will tell you about 60% of all cases now, there's some element of information. What people call background checks, we call due diligence. What do you want to know about the person you're going to sue? How big a fight's it going to be? Who's this guy suing you? Maybe it hasn't got to that point yet. Maybe you're realizing there's a problem in your life or in your business and you have identified where that problem's coming from. How much information can you obtain about that individual so you can then decide what strategy you utilize to address your problem?
I also want to mention, as a lawyer who was involved in litigation for many years on both sides, is that you can help the lawyer scrutinize the claim and verify the facts.
Correct. So I like to say sometimes that even lies can be lead generators for investigators. You know, our job is to go out there and figure out what the viability is. So maybe it's something as simple as an insurance defense case, whether you're on the plaintiff side or the defendant side. Sometimes the plaintiff wants to know the viability of the case. A lot of times the insurance side thinks they're defending a case, but they need their investigator to come back and say, wait a minute, I know you think this is defensible, but based upon what we're seeing, this person really is injured. So your investigators can bring some objectivity to what you're looking at.
So you can investigate the basis of the claim, you know, how serious it was, whether there was prior notice or not, if there's actual recordings or witnesses to the events that the case is based on or that the defense is based on.
So in essence, it's our job to buy the groceries so that the lawyer can cook the meal.
Okay.
So
to give them those ingredients.
Right. Everything he needs to make his case and put that thing together for him.
And if the attorney, if he or she does not have the right ingredients or the right recipe, it's not going to go well.
Right, and that's why they need their investigators to help them understand. Listen, we have times when attorneys call up to investigate their own clients. Before they take a case, they want to decide, hey, before they invest their time and energy and money into pursuing a certain claim, how viable is it? Because sometimes the client only comes in with their perspective. They need the investigators to bring some objectivity into what they're looking at.
And also, they know the other side is going to carefully scrutinize the case and the claim and the facts and the prior history, so they may want to get heads up on that. They don't want surprises in court.
And that's why it's important. You make the point you highlight is investigators want to make sure they have a good reputation of being objective, not like a doctor who everyone knows, hey, that's the guy you go to when you're trying to fake your injury. As an investigator, you want to be someone that both sides of a conflict will understand, hey, if that's, I want people to look at the Belmont Group and say, yes, these guys are objective and they're fair and they're honest and they're ethical. So they're seeing it a certain way. They're not trying to just make that up. That's what the facts will dictate.
And you also, to the extent, might be investigating the bias or the independence of witnesses. Do they know the plaintiff or defendant? Do they see what they're claiming, or the documents authentic?
Right. Well, that's a huge part of every aspect of the case. From the beginning, I always like to say KYC, know your client, but also know your witnesses, know everyone involved. So that ability to go out there and bring back that objectivity is an essential part of that attorney's case. He has to rely upon you. And at the same time, when you do send an investigator out to talk to a witness, you have to keep in mind that investigator is like your customer service rep. That witness who you're not sure about how important in your case they are today in July 2020, that case may not go to trial for 3 years. So that witness you find today, 3 years from now, you got to go back and find that witness. And you better hope that investigator left a good impression on that person and got themselves in a position where they ingratiated themselves to get the cooperation later when you're really going to need that testimony from that witness.
And I assume that you would also help attorneys on both sides in trial prep to locate that witness, to confirm the information, and help them get to the courthouse on time.
Correct. Anything they need that's investigative, we'll take care of.
And in these days, the information that you provide to the plaintiff or the defendant, I assume the counsel can use that to try to negotiate or mediate a resolution of that matter, especially in these days when the courts are very backlogged and it's not business as usual.
Correct. So in essence, each side is looking to have an edge. I mean, that's why they want their investigator. They have an understanding of where they're going with their case. They're looking for us to help them support that case, but many times there's information you will obtain in the course of an investigation that will be pivotal. So in the most common area where you see a lot of investigations is maybe a personal injury, a slip and fall, insurance defense, or med mal case. Someone's claiming they can't move, they can't do anything, and then the old, the famous TV show aspect of the person's outside shoveling snow or doing their roof work. Obviously, if an investigator gets you information like that, it's valuable. It's also valuable in litigation that's commercial litigation. Someone's claiming something's worth a certain amount of value to it, or maybe there's a dispute over the value. So having an investigator counterdict or support that becomes very important.
And on the other side, if it's a legitimate claim, you can prove there was notice, there were facts, there were prior claims, it was a real defect. That can help one side or the other. Correct.
So if you want to look at a defect, you have the question of determining if the defect was there. It could be years ago. So you have to find witnesses that maybe you have to evaluate the credibility of those witnesses if they have a bias. But it also has value to your client if you come back and say, hey, listen, I got news here. All the evidence is showing you're in a bad position. Well, that has value. It helps the client know to settle out a case earlier than later and not endure all those extra costs.
What tips and advice can you offer attorneys in a tort setting on one side or the other in this COVID environment where there's no new normal, and trying to investigate cases and trying to prepare them for depositions or discovery or trial?
Do you mean more likely in the personal injury world or insurance defense area?
In both, yes. Yeah. Let's start with those.
Yeah, in that area, which is obviously, that's kind of bread and butter for many investigators. That one area of the law has constant need for field investigations. So one, we know the insurance defense firms now are concerned because without the court appearances, their typical 3-hour billable went down to a 0.3. So they're finding ways now to really scrutinize cases and go to their investigators and try and work up those cases. So even though we're in a COVID world, there is a philosophical difference between some attorneys who are like, I don't know if ethically we should be out there doing surveillance when people should be quarantining, but we're really not in that world anymore. People are out and about, even though they're wearing masks. So there really is no restrictions on how you're doing that. It is a little difficult to get a witness to talk to you if they are COVID scared and they don't want to come outside. So you try to find creative ways, always ingratiating yourself, always being polite and respectful to witnesses, but you have to adapt yourself. But there's no reason why any investigation should not be moving forward in the COVID world. You just have to adapt yourself and make sure you have investigators that understand the sensitivities of the individuals you're contacting during this time.
What types of commercial matters do you find yourself involved with on behalf of one client, one side or the other in this COVID world we're now in?
Well, a lot of it is real estate disputes or contract disputes. So whether there's a deal that went bad and people are upset about that and they feel one side did the other side wrong, or real estate deal that didn't go well. There was some cases, there was definitely a lull there for March, April, and May, what was going on because everybody was on the sidelines waiting to be forward. But now there's a lot of backup, a great deal of fraud. We're seeing a significant increase in fraud, whether it's unemployment fraud, PPP fraud, regular fraud in vendor disputes with vendors and suppliers. So that has become a real issue. A strained economy will always be apt to have those type of situations.
So both sides are trying to maximize their situation. The claimant or the plaintiff may be trying to claim losses or benefits they're not entitled to, and the person on the other side may be claiming losses or lack of income that are not correct.
Well, the problem with COVID is, so one of the issues with COVID is it's devalued a lot of what people had. So whether the focus of the contract was worth X amount, now they argue it's not anymore. Whether it's real estate, we can see already the hit commercial real estate's taking. Surprisingly, residential real estate, especially on Long Island, has increased because of people trying to get out of that city. So depending on where you are, you have to adapt yourself and read the terrain and understand how to make the most of that situation.
I'd just like to remind the listeners, we're talking to Bill Belmont. He's the head of the Belmont Group. He's an attorney and a private investigative firm, and he's telling us about how investigators can help attorneys and litigants. Bill, is it better that an attorney or a client involve you earlier as opposed to later on? Is it better they involve you when they first get the case or first get heavily involved in discovery, or as opposed to the eve of trial?
No, we don't. I mean, as we began our call today, I was working on a case where a law firm needed to find a defendant to serve them, and I'm looking at the stuff they sent me, and it's all a mess, and I don't know what direction they went, whether they had a paralegal do it first or someone else tried it, but all this information was inaccurate, so I have to untangle all that, and that's a minor issue for investigators. The real issue is if you went out there and you actually went down a path and pursued witnesses and did interviews and it wasn't done properly. So we always want to be involved, even pre-litigation. As early on as you believe there's an issue, we like to be worked into the process so we can help. And again, as a former trial attorney myself, I have the ability to know where the case is going, what you're going to be concerned with. Should we ultimately, although rare, end up in front of a jury, how we want to be positioned so we can take advantage of that opportunity.
You also want to help, whichever side you're working for, helping to document the loss or document the conditions where an accident occurred, or what the claims are for one party or the other.
Are you saying how we document that? Or
no, it's important to document, and is that one of the services you provide? Back
in the day, if there was an incident involved and you had to go out there to document that incident, now you can seriously just Google map it, and the judge will accept it as long as the witness claims it's a fair and accurate depiction of the accident scene. Back in the day, we had the old 35mm cameras. You couldn't get that many photos. Now it is so easy to document what's going on. Plus, the reason you want it, now that you bring up a point, you talked about getting involved in pre-litigation. We want to be involved as soon as the client has identified a problem. So take all the ability now with all the security cameras that are around the world. Even with people that do great systems, they're still only holding that video for 60 days. So the number of times we get called about an incident and 6 months later, 2 weeks later, how much we wish we could have gone back right at the beginning and been able to document exactly what was going on during that situation. And for locating individual witnesses, same thing with witnesses. There's nothing worse than finding out 6 months, 9 months later, trying to get a witness and nobody got their information.
And also they might be less likely to cooperate and remember less as time goes on. Now, in terms of Google, can you just rely on a Google photograph, or it's just one sort of information in that the real location may have changed and that may or may not reveal a defect or perspective that's no longer true?
Right. So any good attorney, for the most part, is going to say, go get me fresh photographs. But what's interesting, my point was just about technology now, that the criteria that a judge is asking for, any witness that will testify that it's a fair and accurate depiction of what it looked like on the day of the time they're testifying to, could be utilized. But for the most part, we always talk about you want to do the 360 view on a photograph. So you want to go out to a scene of an incident or an accident, take pictures from 360 degrees, from 6 inches to 6 feet to 60 feet. And it's so easy now just to document that with one hard drive. You can have all the information you need.
What other information do you believe it's important for attorneys, whether they represent plaintiffs or defendants, to know about the role of investigators and how investigators like you can be of help in their litigation?
Well, I think it's important. The one thing I find surprising, the issue that the business owner or the attorney may be dealing with, they may have it's the first time they have a situation, and by the time they're done talking about it and thinking about it, they've actually decided to call their investigator. And for me, I could have worked on this case, this type of situation 200 times. So I always try to tell the attorneys, tell me more about the case. So simply, someone may call me up and say, Bill, I need X. I go, wait a minute, I know you want to need X, but can we talk about the case a little bit? And in that process of doing so, we can give them let me give you a real life example. Just got a call last week on an asbestos case. As you know, those are years ago. They're years old. And there's about 80 locations in the city where this plaintiff worked, and they wanted to try and get us to go into the location and just take photographs of all 80 locations. But by having conversations, having experience in this, we talked about serving a letter on those offices. We talked about finding former employees from those businesses who could just simply give us testimony as to whether the machine was there or not. So there was a situation where an experienced attorney who hadn't dealt with this issue before had a certain idea in his mind of what to do. But when he allowed me to be involved in the conversation, I could share with him my years of experience and give him some better ideas and different ways to go.
So you can help a business owner or an attorney or perhaps a forensic accountant manage the scope of an investigation.
Yes, we like to always be on those investigative teams or crisis management teams because we always get to bring a different perspective to those type of situations.
I'd like to just remind our listeners that we're talking with William Belmont, and he is the head of the Belmont Group. He's an attorney and an investigator and helps lawyers on both sides with their litigation and tries to help the party he's representing prevail. And you're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and podcasts of this show and many other shows on WHPC are available on nccradio.org. Bill, in other types of business disputes, aside from torts, how can you be of help to one party or the other?
I think the one thing that we have experience with are typically, other than our security services, we're not really called into a situation because people are having a party, it's a wedding or a sweet 16. They're calling us because there's some sort of dispute, there's some sort of issue there. And allowing us to be part of your resolution team, allowing us to engage with you in conversations on how to understand your situation and how to find a resolution for it is something they don't always take advantage of. And from practical speaking, it's information. When there's a dispute, the number one thing both sides are looking for is information. That's really what it's all about. Information is power in this world now.
And information can help you win the case.
Information could be the entire difference in winning or losing the case.
Okay.
Having the right information, the most comprehensive information is key.
And what about the idea of identity theft? What other things can people do to prevent identity theft, whether they're an individual or a small business, especially in this time where we're of less face-to-face dealings?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's been a major uptick in the calls we've gotten to address fraud cases and identity theft cases. Unfortunately, the government's process of its unemployment payments that they've been making have not been very complex. So there's been a huge number of people who are getting calls up from their HR department saying, hey, why is New York State claiming you're unemployed? So really, it's about making sure that you have as much information secured as you can. You can't click on emails if you don't know who they're from. The fact that happens so frequently is really a problem. You know, one of the major scams that they have, and many times they're overseas, whether it's Korea or Russia, they'll put a sniffer software in your computer. So in your computer, they're watching everything you do, and they know you have a business deal coming up. They know that Kenny's working on a deal to send money to ABC Corporation, and they know Kenny is working with his accounts payable department. And the day of that event to take place, they'll then morph you. They'll create an email to your accounts payable department saying, send the money now to this address, and all of a sudden people will do that. And if all you did was click on that email address, you know who it is. So there's a lot of little measures you want to put in place. You want to make sure you have good password security. You want to have double-factor authentication when you can, and you want to just keep up to date on all the latest technology on your software.
And should you be very weary of clicking on links or following advice on links? How can you be sure it's a legitimate website or a legitimate request?
Well, as you'll know, no institution is going to ask you for your social security number, your date of birth, or any type of information like that. So you have to know who you're doing business with and when you're dealing with them. So the other aspect to that is making sure that you verify. Email address scams are the easiest ones. Kenny, I can't stress enough. When you get an email and it looks like it's coming from someone you know, if you just hover your mouse over that email address, you'll see it's not the person you think. They can't morph that part of it. So just making sure you know who you're doing business with at all times is very important. And if you're not sure, verify it.
And when in doubt, don't click. Don't hit that link.
Right. And everything should be verified. Any big money wires, just like we tell all our clients, no one person should ever sign a check over X amount of dollars. You just want to verify. Make sure you have people in the process, have controls in place, have checks and balances in place. It's the only way to make a difference.
Even assuming there's not a lawsuit hasn't started, if you represent, let's say, you're giving advice to a business or retailer and an accident report comes in, what investigative services do you try to do for them when there's, even before there's a claim from day one?
Correct. Those are always the best cases. We got a call 2 weeks ago on a truck fatality case on an accident. There's nothing better than that. We're able to get a call quick enough. We can get to the scene and secure everything. So we tell our clients all the time, as soon as, even being more proactive than that, Kenny, we train their employees on what to do should they be in a situation. So it's even better than waiting till they get the claim in. People should know what to do in those situations. But as soon as a client gets something in the mail or gets some indication there's going to be a claim, we want to immediately try to figure out what happened and secure as much information as we can. Is there video? Is there witnesses? Are there medical reports, police reports, management reports, facility reports? As much information up front so we can properly evaluate the case early on and make a determination where to go with it.
And what about in terms of the institution or the store having a good accident documentation policy? In other words, what should they try to do right after there's an accident? What's the best practice?
Well, the one thing is before there's an accident, like as you began to indicate, is to have an accident policy. What do we, first of all, even better than that, what are we doing to prevent accidents in our store? Are we a store owner who's just letting people walk around? If we're a supermarket, do we have a policy to tell our employees, make sure every X amount of minutes you're walking up and down the aisles? Is there spilled milk? What do you do if there's spilled milk? How do we handle that? How do we document that? Many times you'll go into a business and you'll see inside the bathroom, they actually have the time and the initials of the person that went in there and cleaned. So having a policy in place where you're proactively trying to identify problems and addressing them before they become issues is important.
And what about if there is an event, what should they immediately do to document that event?
Well, first thing is the safety of your customers and your employees, making sure that no matter what the nature of it is, the first thing you're trying to do is do it safe. Now, the rule as a business owner, you always want to keep in mind, your lawyers, we like to make things complex and confusing. Always do what's reasonable. In the end, you are always going to be evaluated and being asked, did you do what was reasonable? What was your justification for doing it? What were your considerations for doing it? And if you're being reasonable, that makes all the difference in the world. So in those type of situations, they want to make sure they're making sure they protect their employees and their customers, and then try to resolve the issue so that there's no more damage being done to anyone.
And certainly an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If they learn of a defect, some kind of condition or issue, they should immediately shut it down or try to correct it.
Correct. I mean, supermarkets now you'll see will have the cones in place. Some of the more advanced ones actually have the cones in the aisles. So if an employee sees it, what's the new one now? I just saw recently they have a robot going up and down the aisles who's trying to identify things and announcing if something's there. So there are things you can do to be proactive to secure the area.
As one person who's been a lawyer and is now as a private investigator, what do you wish attorneys knew about private investigators? It's self-serving, but having been on both sides, I do know they're very underutilized. And as you mentioned earlier, it's so important to call us early on in the case. Don't make an assumption of doing something. First of all, it's a very personal relationship. There's a great deal of trust that goes into what an investigator is doing, not just the ethical issues about it. So I would say develop a relationship with your investigator, get an understanding of their background, the type of cases they've worked on, what they've done before. And really, as an attorney myself, I'm just like another member of the firm. I can sit with you and we can talk about strategy and how we're going to try and work the case. And maybe there's things we can do for you as investigators, maybe there's not. But allowing me to share my years and years of experience in the thousands of cases I worked on is something that will really benefit you as an attorney. Every time you call your investigator, you don't have to retain your investigator. You could just call up and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Let's talk about it a little bit. That should be utilized more. So you can advise them what their options might be in preparing for the case and preparing for the worst and how you can help them and what else they should consider.
Absolutely.
And on the other side, what do you involve, aside from what you said before, what do you wish business owners, both small and large, knew about investigators?
Well, business owners, depending on we have a lot of employment-related issues. COVID's raising a lot of issues now. When one of the employees says, I'm not coming in because I'm afraid to be around people, well, what happens when that employee is going out to the movies when they open up, or going to the beach or going out to the parks and so forth. So business owners, again, want to make sure they have a plan in place and utilize your investigator to be proactive. Don't wait till you have a problem with your employees. Proactively create an understanding of that so your investigator can help you when that comes up.
And what about in discrimination issues? Do you interview the employees on both, the complainant and other witnesses to try to present a dossier of facts to the company so they have an independent view as to what happened?
Correct. So oftentimes that's why we will be called in. So the attorneys for the actual client will have a difficult time actually interviewing their client's employees because they are the attorney for the client. So they need an independent, objective third party to come in who solely be assigned to gather the facts. And we go wherever the facts take us.
I just like to remind our listeners that you're listening to Bill Belmont. He's an attorney and he's the head of the Belmont Group, and they work as investigators for lawyers and also corporations. And you are listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 FM, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. Podcasts of this show, if you missed any part of it, and of many programs here on WHBC are available at nccradio.org. Bill, what information do you have available to the general public and to lawyers on your website?
What information?
Yes.
So the information tells a little about the company. I have my personal bio there. It talks about, we're a New York-based national investigation firm, so we could do work all over the country. And it talks about the different services, the different areas that we will address should you need it. I'm always stressing to people, if you're in an adversarial relationship, call us. If you're thinking of calling the cops, you can call us.
And what do you recommend to clients and attorneys in terms of record retention? Does it, if they have records, more records rather than fewer, is that going to help them if there's a claim or investigation?
Well, that is very specific to the type of claim and the type of case. Obviously, you have to meet whatever your legal obligations are to retain your records for a certain period of time. And I have seen on both sides, that's a double-edged sword. Other than obviously meeting whatever your counsel tells you the law dictates you must maintain. But sometimes it's almost like the video cameras police officers wear. Sometimes they may wish they didn't have it. Other times they want to have it. So sometimes those records will help you out and be to your value. Other times they may not be.
Okay. Do you have any final tips for attorneys or corporations or the public themselves who may be involved in litigation?
I think the most important thing in this day and age is to make sure you're proactive. There's many things you can be doing to prevent a claim. You should be looking at your business operations. You can be looking at an understanding of how you do business. Are there flaws in that? Are there weaknesses? And if you've had a claim before, you should be able to go back in and reevaluate. So every time something happens, you want to do an after-action report. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? What can we do better? And through that process, you'll better yourself. Once litigation begins, it's about gathering information. So as soon as you have noticed there might be a problem, you want to get your investigator involved so we can gather as much information as we can to properly either defend your claim or help pursue your claim.
And it's a new world out there, so this is a good time to reevaluate those policies.
Yes, all the time.
Can you give us your website again and your contact info?
Sure. It's the Belmont GRP. The company's called the Belmont Group, so it's the BelmontGRP.com. And I can be reached at bill@thebelmontgrp.com or 212-695-0086.
And we'd like to thank Bill Belmont, who's an attorney and a private investigator, for being our guest on Law You Should Know. Please remember that whatever you have heard is presented as information only and is not intended to be legal or financial advice. If you missed any part of the show, it's available as a podcast at nccradio.org. This is your host, Ken Landau, and please join us again at this same time next week for another program of Law You Should Know.